Death by Individualism. Hi, I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, there's a story in USA Today about the way that China responded once they got done lying about the fact that there was no human transmission of the COVID-19 virus, how China responded with essentially a total shutdown in the Wuhan area and the Hubei province, as well as other major areas of the country. And the implication of the story, or rather the direct statement of the story, is that the United States simply cannot do what China did for the last 2 months simply because we don't have that collectivist mentality. We don't have the political will. We're not willing to do things like completely shut down apartment buildings or require passes to get in and out. We're not willing to separate relatives from each other if they show even mild symptoms of the disease. We wouldn't fly drones around the streets of the city with loudspeakers that are shouting at people who are out in public who aren't supposed to be, or rebuking people who aren't wearing masks. We wouldn't set up sudden temporary hospitals and bring in thousands of people from other parts of the country to focus effort in one area, because we don't have that kind of mindset, not only authoritarianism, but collectivism. Bill, is it possible that America's great strength of that rugged individualism could be our weakness in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic?
First of all, just the communist regime alone under Mao killed 50 million of its own people. So when U.S. numbers from the COVID-19 infection start to approach 50 million people, then maybe we can talk about some kind of parity between the two systems in terms of quality of life or the ability to respond to emergencies.
Well, and as you well know, Bill, we're not trying to evaluate this on any other basis. And in fact, up front, I stipulate that China has been lying out the wazoo about the actual impact of the disease. And it's hard to know even now what kind of numbers they're producing.
Best estimates that I've heard from two different sources is that the numbers in China are 40 times higher than what they're saying. But let's just put that aside for a minute. If you want to consider it a strength that China has the legal and cultural authority to simply barricade off areas of their city, like Wuhan, for example, in order to stop the spread of the virus, I would say they weren't too successful with that authoritarian response. As a matter of fact, it's the authoritarian response that allowed it to get out in the first place, and it's the authoritarian response that continues to cripple every single effort at containing this virus all around the world. This regime, from the beginning of its regime, has decided that saving face is more important than saving lives. And it has lied from the beginning. It has told doctors to destroy samples of this COVID-19 virus when it was first detected in China, well before it ever arrived on American shores. There was no question whatsoever that the Chinese government knew that they had an infectious disease that was transmittable from human to human, and nevertheless, they allowed 8,000 people a day come to Los Angeles, and this continued until President Trump shut the door on them. So in terms of the idea that, wow, it's really great that they have the authority to quarantine a city like that, and we would never put up with that, I have heard reports that people have been, in some cases, had the doors to their apartments or offices welded shut with them on the inside.
USA Today says that there's an Australian social media site that had a video of that happening. However, USA Today was not able to independently verify that it actually had happened or that it happened in China. But Bill,
I wouldn't fall off my perch. Hold on. There's a second side to this. There's another half to this. So that's the case for the authoritarian regime. On the other hand, when you talk about the individualist society in the United States, what do we see in terms of that? Yes, it's true. It's harder for us to unilaterally just lock people down. But what we also see is that all kinds of medical breakthroughs that are really, literally happening in real time. Johns Hopkins University says we think that antibodies will be able to be transferred through blood plasma. We find people who were making pillows are now making respirator masks. We find people that were making cars are making ventilators. We find the absolute pinnacle of individualism is not only producing results that reduce the virus, they're producing results that reduce the impact of the virus around the world. And to me, to make any kind of equation between these two, as if there's anything on the Chinese scale that's an advantage I think is completely dishonest, and I certainly don't see the
Bill,
case.
and I certainly don't want to get in a situation where I'm suggesting that, China gets the gold medal, USA gets the bronze or something like that. It's not really
You're comparing the two systems, though.
Yeah, no.
And you're asking if our individualism doesn't kill us.
Can a system like ours, in which freedom and liberty are so highly valued, be successful fighting off something that essentially says you need to not only voluntarily give up your liberty, your freedom to travel, your ability to go wherever you please, whenever you want. Not only do you have to give that up, every last one of you virtually has to give it up in order to stop this thing, because even a few people traveling around and touching others can cause this disease to continue to spread through family networks.
The beautiful thing about this, Scott, is that, as I said, the totalitarian well-you-into-your-building approach did not contain the virus. But that once the virus got out,
Bill,
the individualist approach, approach.
Let me just add to that, though. What they're talking about in this USA Today article is not what the Chinese did in the initial period of time when they were denying that there was any human transmission of the virus. This is after they finally acknowledged, a month and a half, maybe 2 months after the disease first raised its ugly head, when they finally acknowledged there was human transmission to humans going on. Then they went into total lockdown. And so I don't want to get those two ideas mixed in how I'm presenting this case.
Okay, well, then you want to compare how the two societies... Look, the entire argument is, as usual, that somehow the American system does have its defects vis-a-vis the communist system. Yes, they're totalitarian, and yes, they murder their own people, but they're a lot more effective when it comes down to locking down their populations, and therefore better equipped to deal with a pandemic like the COVID-19 virus. But there's no evidence of that whatsoever. As we say, we don't have the faintest idea what the numbers are in China, but without question, they are infinitely higher, far higher, 20 times, 30 times, 40 times higher than what they're reporting. Because they're not reporting it because they don't want to embarrass the government. And as a matter of fact, they made a big show of saying, hey, no new cases anymore. Guess what? We're going to open up this province and we're going to have people go back to movie theaters. And they did go back to movie theaters for about a week. And then they shut them down again because now probably thousands more people are going to die in China as a result of the authoritarian government's effort to shut down information as well as people. Now,
and if that's true, let me just say, if that's true, Bill, if the lies have continued and in fact are worse than ever because now they're hiding the potentially thousands of deaths, then this whole USA Today piece falls apart because the whole thing is premised upon the idea that China is being more effective in this social isolation than the United States and some other countries are. And they're bringing up the contrast. The reason why the U.S. is having such a hard time is because we won't accept collectivist top-down orders.
Makes you wonder why they would write an article like that. Actually, it really does make you wonder. So let's just look at the American response to this. The American response has not been to weld people into buildings, and the American response has not been to fly drones at people and all the things that you mentioned. The American response has been to communicate directly to the American people that this is a national crisis and we all have to do our part, and people have voluntarily kept themselves indoors. We do not have people going down the streets with cars that are blowing out through amplifiers. You will remain inside or you will be shot. None of that stuff is happening. We don't have guys in Humvees with machine guns walking down the streets. We don't have any of this stuff. And furthermore, because this has been voluntary, Americans have not only been able to keep their fundamental liberties because it has been voluntary, they also have managed to keep, by and large, their sense of good cheer. And I've seen this everywhere out there. I've seen people just making a major effort to be as cheerful and as happy as possible and to get through this.
And nevertheless, the infection rate and the death rate continues to grow. I'm not enough of a mathematician to be able to say that it's exponential, but it's rapid.
Yes, that's what happens when a virus gets loose on a society, because the virus location was a totalitarian regime that decided not to tell anybody about it. That's true that the death rate is increasing and the number of infections is increasing, and they will continue to increase. But when people look at the total deaths, they go, oh my gosh, look at America. It's up there at 8,000 or whatever the number is today. So pretty soon we're going to pass Italy. We have what? We have
a lot
5,
more
6
people
times
than
the population. At least that. So what really matters, if you really want to get down to playing the game about comparing America to China and our response to China's response, what you have to do is you have to get down to the number of deaths per million. And the United States, in terms of major countries, is probably about second behind Germany, somewhere around South Korea, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower. We don't know that yet.
You're just saying per capita, not per number of identified infections.
Per capita, obviously, yes, exactly. So in that regard, we're doing extremely well. Certainly in terms of our ability to respond to the crisis by doing things like raising the bar that we're supposed to keep the curve under, by increasing the number of ventilators that are made available because Ford's going to start making them. Some pillow guy is going to start turning out 50,000 masks a day. We find drug therapies and all the rest of this stuff just coming out of the woodwork every single day because of the freedom. The American people are producing solutions to this problem in a far better way than China is, and China's figures are so unbelievably clearly false that it begs just beggars imagination how a newspaper could write something like that and take them at their word and basically say they locked down their culture and they don't have any more new cases.
So
what it tells me.
So let's forget about China then. Because granted, that's a bad case study, and USA Today took it, so that's why we're discussing it. But let's forget about China and just look at the United States itself vis-a-vis the COVID-19 pandemic. What kind of challenges do we face as a society that values the get out of my way, let me do as I damn well please, against a virus that basically says, yeah, go ahead, do what you please, because that's the culture in which I thrive?
The disadvantages for a free people as opposed to the situation in China where they can just lock down everybody is that there will be spots, there will be isolated cases where people's foolish behavior will have serious and often fatal consequences. There's a group of students who came back from, my understanding, came back from Cabo San Lucas. Something like 40 or 50 college kids went down to Mexico in the height of the spread of the epidemic. Now 26 of them have tested positive for COVID-19. There have been a couple, and I mean, when I say a couple, I mean two. We talked about this just a couple days ago. Two congregations of the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of congregations all around the country that have decided that they're going to disregard this public health advice and go ahead and have their congregations in person anyway. And that is their right, and that is the price we pay for a free society. But if you look at it in terms of the total number of people and the total number of incidents of people who have voluntarily not done the smart thing or the right thing, what you find that you're dealing with a society in terms of the United States that is, with two exceptions, 3 out of 330 million people, voluntarily willing to do what the Chinese government had to lock their people into their houses to do. Let's not forget that when this thing really started to get out of the bottle, people were fleeing Wuhan. Chinese people were fleeing Wuhan, 25,000 a day or whatever the number was.
Millions of them, yes.
Yes, exactly. Exactly right. They were running for their lives. And then finally, the Chinese authorities put the lockdown around it. Now, nobody is running for their lives here. You're seeing some sort of seepage around the edges where people in New York City, mostly rich people, wealthy people, are trying to make it out to their country homes. And that's causing some friction with the locals and so on. And there's been some serious discussions about whether or not a state like Rhode Island has the right to simply say, no New York tags are going through here until we get past this. This is the serious issues that we're dealing with. But this is not not millions of people swimming the East River or the Hudson to get the hell out of Manhattan. That's just not happening. It's just not. And when you hear articles like this, I'm reminded of an article that I saw on the Drudge Report, who in my mind has lost his mind. And here's what the article said. Here's the headline. Prison convicts being paid to dig mass graves in New York City. Now, that's a fairly ominous sounding kind of report, isn't it? Prison, we're paying inmates to go out and dig mass graves? And then you read the article. what you discover is that the actual cemetery, I forget the name of the island, in New York, one of the cemeteries that's used there has a very limited amount of space. And you find, to your astonishment, that it's been common practice to have inmates digging graves in this particular cemetery. It's been happening for 20, 30, 40 years. Maybe it's been happening for 100 years. Who knows?
Individual graves.
So, yes. And so this whole thing, like, my God, we have to get prisoners out of prison and have them start digging pits that we could just bury these masses of people in. That article, I'm not saying that won't happen. What I am saying is that when that article was written, it was clearly deceptive and designed to cause people to be in a state of maximum fear. And this is what the news media appears to want, a state of maximum fear. The best spin you can put on this, and I mean the best spin that you can put on this, is that these people who have so long considered themselves to be our intellectual and spiritual and moral superiors have decided that the people of the United States are too stupid to understand that this is a real problem. And if they give them any kind of information that would be mitigating to the overall level of terror that they've decided must be maintained, then that information has to be silenced immediately. That's the best spin you can put on it. The worst spin you can put on it is that all of these people are doing everything they can to trash the economy, to trash the president, do whatever they need to do in order to drag their galvanized husk of a candidate over the line in November.
There is something about the way we think, though, Bill, and it's funny because I see this in myself. We do have a different way of looking at life than most people do, and I don't know if it's humorous or perhaps dangerous, but there's something that happens to an American who is typically used to spending 10 to 12 hours a day indoors. When he finds out that he can't go outdoors, even though he was always spending all of his time indoors, he wants to go out now. He's like, I see more people out in my neighborhood than I've ever seen in my life. There are people flooding out into the streets. They're pushing baby strollers, walking dogs, riding bikes, when usually if you saw a couple of people a day, that was a lot.
Absolutely right. And here's the beautiful thing about that. I'm seeing that exactly in our neighborhood too. I've heard something to the effect that maybe Chicago or New York, but put those two places aside just for a moment. Here in California, which was the first state to get this kind of you will stay at home kind of thing, things like exercise and hiking and walking and bicycle riding were clearly accepted, made exception for. As a matter of fact, that statement from Governor Newsom came in live during the Stratosphere Lounge, and I read the statement, and essentially what the statement said was, you can go hiking, you can walk your dog, you can ride your bicycle, you just have to do it indoors. And there's just absolute confusion there. But my point is this. If you look outside the window right now in Los Angeles or any other neighborhood in America, what you'll find is states that are told safer at home. You will find people out there exercising, getting a little bit of time outdoors, getting some fresh air, and when they pass each other, they generally nod, they generally smile, and they maintain probably 10 feet of separation between them in the outdoors where the air is blowing. The risk of infection from that kind of a contact is zero. So what we find is that we are not only doing what we need to do to flatten the curve, we're doing it voluntarily. We're doing it at least as effectively as the Chinese lockdown did. And we don't have to lie about our numbers because our numbers are infinitely better in terms of mortality and infection than what this totalitarian regime that this article is trying to basically set up admiration for.
And to reiterate, this is not a competition. And in fact, what Bill's talking about, the idea of reporting accurate numbers does more than anything to fight the disease. Because if you know what you're facing, you've got a better chance of defeating it. And it's just like, forgive the analogy, but in wartime, if you think that your army is going up against 5,000 men, and you go back and tell the general that, well, he'll prepare for 5,000. But if you tell him that it's only 2,000 and it's really 5,000, then he's going to have a hard time fighting that brigade or division.
Right. And the idea of individual Chinese businessmen, engineers, or whatever stepping up and publicly saying, hey, we can build some respirators here. We can do this. We can do that. It's inconceivable. It's inconceivable. And you've said it twice now, Scott. You said this isn't a competition, and I agree. But the article made it a competition, and that's why we're talking about it. So the bigger issue, really, because when it's all said and done, the numbers will be the numbers, and when it's all said and done, maybe 30, 40, 50 years from now, or maybe a year from now after the communist Chinese regime falls, we'll have an idea of what the actual numbers were, and we will see how America performed relative to China and relative to the rest of the world. Now,
I will tell you the headline said, Bill, just so we can have clarity on this, because I always know that I bring my biases in paraphrasing things, so I may not be accurately portraying it. So here's what the headline in USA Today said, realizing the author of the article probably did not write the headline. This is what China did to beat coronavirus. Experts, hang on a second, experts say America couldn't handle it.
No, well, no, of course not. Not a bunch of, knuckle-dragging, low-sloping forehead rubes out there in flyover country. Certainly the New Yorkers who write those articles, they're certainly capable of it because it's a terrible, terrible life to go from your skyscraper to your limousine and then back to your front door and back up into your skyscraper again. But certainly those stupid rubes out in the rest of the country and flyover country could never handle the kind of toughness that the Chinese have shown. Just the statement that the Chinese have beat the virus.
That seemed like a stretch to me.
No, it's more than a stretch, Scott. It's more than a stretch, and it's more than ideology. It's not up for discussion in terms of whether it's happening or not. You can have discussions about individual cases, and I don't have any evidence of this, but it is clear, and has been clear for months now, that the Chinese government is pumping huge amounts of money into failing businesses like newspapers in order to put the best possible spin on this whole thing. And that's why they were able to say, hey, we have no new cases anymore. Guess what? Hey, we're opening provinces. Nobody believes that. And to report that in a national newspaper is criminal negligence. And the only way you can explain that kind of criminal negligence is that either you are so ideologically opposed to the entire system of government in the United States that this appeals to you on an ideological basis, or somebody's paying you to write something like that. And I think it's not inconceivable that it's both of them. But I would just leave you with this. In terms of the whole thing about China's whipped this problem and so on, we always see that authoritarian societies appear to have a short-term advantage to the degree that Nazi Germany could simply mobilize the population, and Japanese imperialists could just mobilize the population, and on and on and on and on and on. And that China, with its discipline and its regimentation and its obedience to government, no, it's not even a short-term advantage. What we're seeing is that the American individualism has produced and is producing results right now that are unmatched in the world. I'm not saying that we're doing as well as, let's say, Singapore or someplace like that. But the reason that these Asian countries have been doing so well is primarily because they're used to wearing masks. And the reason they're used to wearing masks is because they've had the outbreak of SARS and several other severe respiratory outbreaks since then, also launched upon them by China. And they've had more experience dealing with this kind of thing. Once it becomes clear that masks are actually helping, the American response to masks in the beginning was my response as well, I think. I'm not going to wear a mask because it doesn't protect me. And wearing a mask that doesn't protect me is just plain foolish. What we're finding, and what we are clearly finding, is that, as I covered yesterday on my Chronosphere Lounge show, showing video of microscopic particles captured through lasers and so on, what we're showing is that the masks don't protect you really in any way whatsoever. But what they do is they protect other people. They can very effectively limit the amount of aerosol particles you put out into the air. So to the degree that countries are doing well, there are Asian countries like Singapore and a few others that are, in fact, definitely flattening their curves faster than we are because they've had experience and a social acceptance of things that Americans have not found socially acceptable. But the final thing to say about this is if you want to make the case against individuality, which is certainly what this article is doing, why don't we just look at the mortality rates between New York and California? Last I heard, California had something like 1/8 of the mortality rate that New York has. And the reason for this has been speculated upon as if it's not clear, as if there's no way to know what it is. But the reason that the California infection rate is so much lower than New York, and the reason that California didn't turn into the epicenter the way that New York did, is because in New York, just as in China, you have people being pushed cheek by jowl into shoulder-to-shoulder compartments where one sick person on a subway train infects that entire car. Those people then go out, they touch things on the surface and all the rest of it. If you're not one of those people who has to take the subway, you're getting into a taxi cab that just a few seconds ago, and if you've ever lived in New York, you realize that much of the time, the person who's getting out of the cab, that's the cab you get into. So those places are filled with viruses as well. And the reason, apparently, that California is having such a lower mortality rate is because of the individualism of people in California. I'm one of them. See, I don't go to work on a subway packed next to people and breathing all of their infected air. I, through my generosity and my wisdom and my advanced state of knowledge about the world, have my entire life pretty much gone to work in a self-sealed virus containment capsule. And I've been doing that ever since I was 16. I've been going to work in my own personal self-sealed virus containment capsule that I've been using for quite a while now. And what we're starting to find is that when you take a population the size of Los Angeles and you put every single one of those people on the way into work and on the way out of work, rather than having them jostling through crowds of infected people, every one of them is in their own private self-sealed virus isolation capsule. What you find is that the virus is having a much, much harder time jumping over the carpool lane and getting into the north side of the 405 freeway. And so the entire argument falls flat on its face. And I think what the takeaway is why a newspaper would write an article like that when the initial premise is so just clearly false. What is the purpose of that?
Well, that's USA Today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful to the people who have watched this program, and
CCP
especially
today.
To the people who have provided this program. To those of you who are watching it for free right now, there are a bunch of people out there who have decided that they would like to become producers of content, not just consumers, and they are making it possible for you to watch this right now. Their ranks are growing on a daily basis, and we're grateful to all the new members who are coming in and signing up at BillWhittle.com at that Become a Member link. We couldn't do it without them, and it turns out we don't need to, even in tough times like this, because the longstanding members are staying with us, and those new members are coming in at a more rapid rate. You understand the value of these principles and these ideas and freedom itself in times like this more than most. And we depend
I would just
on
like to
people
say,
like you.
Yeah, I would just like to say to those of you who are watching and are not members yet, the new members have been coming on board very quickly. And however, we are rapidly approaching the time where we will begin to deploy the BillWhittle.com drones that will come down from the sky and immediately start yelling and screaming at you if you have not already joined BillWhittle.com. And furthermore, if we discover that you or your family have not become members of BillWhittle.com, then unfortunately, we're going to have to send some member of the staff out. It's probably going to be Scott. And he's going to have to weld your door shut until you pony up the money.
After we separate family members.
That's right. That's the main thing. That's the main thing. Yeah.
And the worst thing about those drones is they'll all have my voice. If you don't want to see that thing happen, sign up today at BillWhittle.com. Just click that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.